Wars and conflicts are not inevitable. They are caused by human beings. Those who have power can also stop them. Peace does not come from outside. The only people that can make peace are the parties to the conflict. But often a mediator is needed, because peace is made between enemies, not between friends. The task is to help the parties to open difficult issues, to create spaces for dialogue, for respect, for trust. All conflicts can be resolved. There are no excuses for allowing them to become eternal.
Peace is a question of will.
Your Excellency, President Stubb, Mrs. Stubb, Your Royal Highness, Presidents Halonen and Robinson, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends of CMI, dear audience at home. Good evening. My name is Janne Talas and I am the CEO of CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation. I welcome you all to this event, the event marking the 25th anniversary of CMI.
And I am Hanna Klinge, Deputy CEO at CMI, and warmest welcome to everyone, also on my behalf. And thank you for our excellent musicians, Jukka Perko and Beata Antikainen, for setting the mood so beautifully for tonight.
I want to begin by thanking you all. Martti's vision and energy got CMI going 25 years ago, and it still animates us. With your support, we have been able to build on this legacy and make CMI one of the world's leading mediation actors. Many of you have been part of the CMI journey for years, some since the beginning. Some of you have recently joined us as supporters or workers or consultants. We are so happy to have you all here together. Without your contribution, we would not be here tonight. You are here because we want to thank you for your support, and of course, we want to celebrate with you.
And if we're honest, we wish we did not have to be here at all. We wish we lived in a world where CMI's work would not be needed. But here we are. The number of requests CMI receives every year for its work on peace mediation and dialogue exceeds our capacity every year.
The world is changing, and the pace is accelerating, and that means peacemaking must change as well. It must reboot, rethink, and renew. We need to adapt to new realities and have the courage to question what no longer works.
But even as we do adapt, there are things we cannot afford to lose. And those are our core principles for sustainable peacemaking. Things like integrity, inclusivity, and local ownership. We say that CMI is made in Finland with global impact. And tonight we bring global thought leadership to Helsinki to discuss what to keep and what to change, looking into the future of peacemaking. Tonight also marks the culmination of CMI's Ahtisaari Legacy high-level seminar series that we have, together with our partners, convened in 7 high-level dialogues across different corners of the world, bringing Martti Ahtisaari's unique legacy into the present and critically examining what the future holds for the entire field.
President Ahtisaari founded CMI in 2000 after completing his term as president. His vision was clear. CMI was to help to resolve conflicts and give space for young professionals to grow into mediation experts, And I saw it has now produced a lot of middle-aged mediation experts. I see many of them in the room. And I think we have achieved the goal in addition to the middle-aged experts. What started 25 years ago as a small office with a handful of people is today an organization of 90 employees and more than 100 mediation consultants working around the globe. CMI has advanced more than 50 peace processes on 4 different continents.
And while the world has changed around us during the first quarter of the century, the need for dialogue and mediation has not diminished. Our mission endures, but it cannot remain in yesterday's form. So tonight will be about looking forward. It's about imagining what peacemaking must become next. CMI has always worked very closely with its partners, governments, institutions, the private sector, civil society, with communities and individuals who believe that dialogue can really make a difference. That shared effort has carried us thus far. Looking ahead, we know that the next chapter can only be written in the same way, together. So we thank you all for coming here tonight.
With that, we want to officially welcome you. Let us reboot peace together. And with that, I will hand you over to our MC, H.R.H, that will guide us through the evening and introduce the first speaker. Please, Sean.
Thank you, Janne Talas and Hanna Klinge, my middle-aged companions, for opening the evening and setting the tone so honestly, eloquently, and obviously warmly. My name is H.R.H, and I have the pleasure of guiding you through tonight's program. And of course, a warm welcome to all of you here in Finlandia Hall and to everyone who's following this evening through via live stream around the world. As said, tonight we don't look behind, we look ahead. What will peacemaking look like in 25 years? What new possibilities are opening, but also what responsibilities come with them? Although we gather here in Helsinki, obviously the perspective of the evening is global. You'll hear from leaders whose work has shaped conflict resolution worldwide, including several who work closely with President Martti Ahtisaari himself. And with that, having said that, let us turn towards our first conversation of the night. It is my honor to introduce someone who frankly needs very little introduction. His Excellency Alexander Stubb is the 13th President of the Republic of Finland. He took office on the 1st of March 2024. Over the course of his career, he has served as a member of the European Parliament, Finland's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for European Affairs and Foreign Trade, Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and representing the National Coalition Party, which he also chaired from 2014 to 2016. But before becoming president, he worked in academia as director and professor at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute. And of course, importantly for us here tonight, in 2017, President Martti Ahtisaari asked him to chair the board of CMI. President Stubb served as chair until February 2024. As a brief protocol reminder, I would like you to all know that following the upcoming exchange, I kindly ask all guests to rise when President Stubb leaves the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency President Alexander Stubb, and together with our moderator for this discussion, Ms. Katri Makkonen. Welcome.
Mr. President, very good evening and thank you for being here.
Thanks. Thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure. When Martti asks for a favor, you always do it.
Good. So let's set the scene. We all know that the world order is changing. And you've said the old system has died but a new one has not been born yet. And today in the magazine Foreign Policy, you actually mapped out 3 possible scenarios what the world will look like. Can you walk us through them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is one of these generational things that we're seeing a shift a little bit like we saw after World War I. We had an order for 2 decades. After World War II, we had an order for 4 decades. And after the Cold War, we had an order for 3 decades. And right now, we are sort of in this interregnum. And in foreign affairs, I guess the article came out today or yesterday, my argument was that we have 3 scenarios. The first one is this disruption that we're going through right now, where you see a decline of multilateral institution or rejection thereof, and a shift towards multipolarity and transaction and deals. So it's a quite disorderly world. The second scenario is worse. That's a collapse of the current international order completely, where it's pretty much dog eat dog, and a transactional world with 200 nation states which share very little values and are very much focused on interests and power. And the third scenario, which I personally advocate, is a return to a liberal world order based on multilateral international institutions and norms. But in order for that to happen, we need to change the power structure of those institutions, because they were created in the image of the victors of World War II. And what we need to understand that, it's the global South that needs agency in the world as it stands. So these are the 3 scenarios that I'm toying around with.
The headline in your article was quite dramatic. It was, if I remember correctly, "This is the West's last chance." And there was a strong call to action that we need to build a new global order before it's too late. And it's obviously number 3 that you were hoping for. But can we do that?
Yeah, I mean, first, this is probably the moment when I should say, well, it was the editors that did the headline. I had nothing to do with it. But no, I mean, it was actually a proposal that came about a month ago that would this work, and I said, yeah, I mean, that's really good, so let's use it. So the basic argument is that the West has been in the driver's seat of the world order. I mean, depends a little bit how you count, but let's, for argument's sake, say 2 to 3 centuries. And certainly in the 20th century, after both world wars. But I think that the gravity of power is now shifting eastbound and southbound. And when there's a bigger shift in the order, which has to do with demography, Africa will have 4 billion inhabitants by the end of the century. Asia will have 5 billion. And when you add on top of that a shift in economic power, then we in the West have to understand that it's perhaps time to be a little bit more humble in our endeavors. And if there is this sort of tension between, say, the global West, led at least previously by the United States, and the global East, led by China, if you want to convince people on your side, you need to drive what I call a dignified foreign policy. In other words, reach out to the global South and give the global South agency in conflicts, in climate change, in institutions, in economic development, etc., etc. Do I think it's possible? Yes, I do.
But is the West, I mean, is there a West anymore?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult question, and it's also a question which I grappled with in my book, The Triangle of Power, because, when I started writing, it was very much the United States leading the global West, both in terms of values, interests, and power. And it was the United States that towed with it, roughly 50 countries from Europe, from North America, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. And right now, of course, there are elements in American foreign policy which are not traditionally Western, that American foreign policy is driven by different values than we are used to, and probably by different interests than we are used to as well. But power is still there. So I think my job as someone who believes in a liberal world order, I try to convince the Americans that their best friends are still in the West. Whether I'm successful or not, history will tell.
Listening to you and reading your speeches and your book, it almost seems that while you're still, of course, making the case for multilateralism and global cooperation, your realist half has already maybe accepted that multipolarity and transactionalism is what we're heading to.
No, I mean, I think that would be giving up to a certain extent. And in Finnish, there's this saying that a pessimist will never be disappointed. And I think it's probably the most stupid saying in the history of mankind, or at least in the Finnish language, because...
It was the previous prime minister who said that.
So
I
am apolitical, so I stay away from that. I think what happens if you're pessimistic, you give up agency. You become a human being who believes that there is some kind of a deterministic end state of affairs and that you can do nothing about it. And I vehemently disagree with that approach. And I think Martti would disagree with that approach as well. We all have agency to try to change things. But at the same time, I believe that it's important that we deal, especially in foreign policy, with the world that exists, not a world that we wish it would exist. So if you start with that premise, that realistic premise, then you can sort of drive your perhaps more idealistic goals of bringing the multilateral world order back.
Well, like you said, we're here this evening to mark CMI's journey, and CMI would not exist without President Martti Ahtisaari. And he also said that we have to act on the basis of how the world actually is. Like you just mentioned, you knew him very well. You know his thinking very well. So how would President Ahtisaari see or describe the world today?
Well, obviously I can't, put words in his mouth. A lot of my foreign policy thinking comes from the teachings that he taught me over the years, including, dignified foreign policy and being realistic. But I think there were three things that drove Martti quite often. One was optimism. Second one was realism, and the third one was empathy. And I think those are quite good guidelines. So if Martti was looking at the world today, he would still see sort of a glimmer of light somewhere there that, look, the G20 is multilateral. Look, the Global South is finding agency. Look, the African Union is working, ASEAN is working, GCC is working, Mercosur is working. The EU is working, NATO is working. So we're seeing a lot of, regional institutions that are still working. So that would be his optimism. Then his realistic view would be to look at, Russia is an imperial power, as it always has been. How do we deal with that? And then he would be looking at the United States, which has shifted its foreign policy. I would actually argue that it already started in 2016. There are presidents in American history that changed the line. Roosevelt was one of them, Reagan was one of them, and actually Trump already in 2016. But now we can see what American foreign. So he'd live with this realism, and at the same time, finally, he would be empathetic. He'd be looking at solutions in a Martti type of a way, and he quite often got what he wanted.
Yes, he sure did. Well, thinking of today's dynamics, what you just described, how are the conditions for diplomacy and peacemaking changing?
Well, I think they're changing radically, and again, I'll be the Martti optimist. I think there's more of an opportunity than a threat. First of all, diplomacy is back. I remember when I was foreign minister, we started to think that perhaps diplomacy is now more about business and these kinds of things, that you need it less and less because we have these institutions and, we're living in almost eternal peace, so don't worry about it. But diplomacy and geopolitics is back, so that's a possibility for those who are interested, I think, in foreign policy in general. Peace mediation, though, the worry that I have there is that peace mediation has become extremely transactional. And transactions, they hit a wall at some stage. And by that I mean to say that if it was more focused in one international institution, in other words, the United Nations, which would give the legitimacy and have peace mediators around the world, then I think we'd get peace deals that would stick more. I mean, you look at Martti's mandates, for instance, they were quite clear cut, in Namibia and in Kosovo and also in Aceh. But now we see different types of transactional peace agreements, which usually are a little bit shaky.
I was listening to you speak about Martti Ahtisaari in your speech that you held in Tanzania a few months back, and only the parties of the conflict can make peace. And you added that this is something to remember also in today's conflicts. But we are not seeing that, are we?
No, I think what Martti's thesis was that you need ownership in peace. And, if you look at symbolically the pictures that Martti has, in peace agreements, Aceh, the latest, is he'd always sort of bring the hands of the parties together. And he felt that, and as there was in that video clip, that, you bring the parties around the table, and then I sometimes feel he probably saw himself more as an honest broker rather than a peace mediator. And by that I mean to say that he thought that you needed to be honest. So he'd tell both parties that, this is what I want. So in Namibia he said, I want independence. And this is the only reason I come to these negotiations. In Kosovo he'd say, I want independence. And in Aceh, he would say, I want autonomy. And that's the beginning of the deal. And then he starts sort of in an iterative manner to work towards some kind of a deal. And when the deal happens, he doesn't take the credit, he gives the credit to the peacemakers. And I think anyone who worked for CMI as well, anytime you had a meeting with him, he always said, I don't do much here, everyone else does the work, that was his style.
Well, another thing that you said in your speech in Tanzania, I remember it vividly. You said, you can't have a peace mediator that bangs his chest and says, I did the peace. And, it reminded me of somebody.
No, but I've toned down since those days. I'm much more...
Yeah, and it was funny. But then, at the same time, it wasn't funny at all because it was something that's happening.
Yeah, I think, again, I look at the silver lining of things. You can have many views on the world that's changing. You can have many views on American foreign policy. But to me, there are two things that drive American foreign policy right now. One is financial interests. I mean, that is a reality, and there's no hiding of that. But there's another one, and that is the driver of peace. And I think that's a good driver of foreign policy. Now, the rhetoric, I fully understand, is probably not as peaceful as we're used to, but you have to look at the results as well. And sometimes you have to upend peace mediation. I mean, I've spoken to many people in the US administration, and they do some peace mediation in a rather unorthodox way. I think the ceasefire in Gaza is a good example thereof. We need to be result-oriented as well. And we have to also admit that peace mediation changes, and peace mediators come in all different ages and colors. And Martti had a certain style, and that worked in three main cases. And the President of the United States has a certain style, and it has worked well in a few cases. Armenia, Azerbaijan, I mentioned that. It has so far worked in the Middle East, and hopefully it'll work on Ukraine and Russia as well. So, peace mediation is never perfect.
Exactly. Peace mediation is never perfect. There are no perfect solutions to wars. When talking about conflicts and wars, you often mention three. You say Ukraine, you say Gaza, and Sudan. So if there are no perfect solutions to wars, what's a good enough deal? What's a good enough peace?
It's one that lasts. It's one that sticks. I think that's always the key. And I think that's one of the big drivers CMI as an organization has, and Martti had as a president as well. And we quite often use the language of we want a lasting and just peace. But if we're really honest with ourselves, lasting is what we should strive for, and the peace is quite rarely just, because the expectations that you have for what you perceive as just are rarely there.
Well, right now, obviously, today's focus is on the war in Ukraine because a lot is going on. And in an interview today that you gave, or maybe you gave it yesterday, but it was released today anyway, you said that we need to prepare ourselves for a peace that will not fulfill all the requirements of a just peace. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, in Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine,
yes.
I mean, obviously, depends on where you come from and what your historical experience is. You have an identity to a certain war and conflict. And for us Finns, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine has been not only emotional, but also something that we have felt very strongly about from the beginning. And it's now been going on for almost 4 years. And the reason we feel so strongly about it is that historically we've had a very similar experience in the Winter War and War of Continuation. And what I've tried to say from the beginning is that statehood is based on 3 things: independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And the example of Finland was that we retained our independence, unlike our Baltic friends after World War II, but we lost our sovereignty to decide which international institutions we can be in, and we lost 10% of our territory. And what we have to make sure with Ukraine is that they get to keep their independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And we also have to understand that whatever the final decision on territory is, it's a decision that comes from the Ukrainians themselves. But I think it's time in Finland to switch our mindset from the idea that this will be a perfect peace, this will be the ultimate victory in peace negotiation, to there is a possibility that a peace is good, bad, or a compromise. And I think this peace eventually will be a compromise. And it's going to be difficult for many of us to deal with, but remember that it's even more difficult for Ukrainians to deal with. And that's why our main task right now is to support Ukraine in whichever decision they take.
But what if the compromises are very big? I mean, and then a lot of people share the thought that it's not a just peace. What will the consequences be for the world, not just on, us Finns thinking about it?
Yeah, I think the consequences are potentially that the order that used to exist, which after World War II, at least partially, at least from a Western perspective, relied on norms, institutions, and rules, has been broken. And that's why I talk about, this is the moment of Yalta versus Helsinki, actually this hall. Yalta, of course, being with the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia, the victors of World War II, carving up to a certain extent sphere of interest and deciding on a world that was based on big powers, especially in the UN with the UN Security Council, etc., etc. Whereas Helsinki was the idea that the principles of independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity were engraved into a common European security structure, and there were rules, and we stick to that. And now, of course, we have a Yalta country that is breaking Helsinki in terms of Russia. And that's why I think the consequences are not only for European security, but it will basically give, if not a green light, at least a yellow light for the idea that might gives right. And I think personally that's wrong.
As the last question, I'll go back to where we started. I quoted you. You've said the old system has died, but a new one has not been born yet. And Of course, that reminded me of Antonio Gramsci, when in 1930 he was in prison. He was imprisoned by Mussolini, the fascist, and he wrote, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born." And he added, "Now is the time of monsters."
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question because it's actually the way in which I start the book, but I left the monster bit out at the end, so it was selective use of the quote. Yeah, I mean, this is the worry that I have, is that, you know, we moved from a bipolar world, which was Soviet US, to a unipolar world, which was the US. And now we are in a multipolar world. And if the United States leaves the world stage in a few issues, there's always going to be a power vacuum, and someone is going to fill that power vacuum. I mean, you know, we have a former vice minister from Afghanistan here. We don't need to explain to her what it means when the United States and the West withdraws from somewhere and a power vacuum is born. We look at what's going on in Sudan, which basically is an example of a failed transition towards civilian power, where a power vacuum emerged and an outsider came in and started to play with it. So I would much rather see, of course, a world where you have one pole led by the United States, which would then base the system on a multilateral world. But now we're not in that, and what we are going to see, and what we are seeing, is a little bit of a world of monsters right now, as we have seen in the Middle East, as we have seen in Africa, and as we see in Europe. So in that sense, I think the quote holds, and I should have probably kept the monsters in the book as well.
With all the monsters and with all what's going on, where can you still find hope? As you said, you're not a pessimist.
I find hope in humanity and in mankind, and I find hope also in the idea that we humans have a tendency to solve problems, whether it's linked to artificial intelligence, whether it's linked to conflicts, and I find hope in the fact that we are now entering a phase where, by definition, we need more global cooperation than ever before. With climate change, with technology, with development, with the economy. And at the end of the day, we will find solutions. I mean, if people would have been hopeless after World War II, they would have not created the United Nations. There were people who felt that we need to organize society and the world in a new system. And that's when the UN was created, the IMF was created, the World Bank was created, the World Trade Organization was created. And I believe that if we shift the power structure in the current institutions and give agency to the rest of the world, then we will find solutions. And at the end of the day, I think both the heart and the mind, in other words, rationality and empathy, will win.
Let's hope you're right. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you.
And once again, please join me in thanking once again President Alexander Stubb and Katri Makkonen for a very insightful conversation. Thank you again. Now, it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal, a leader whose life work has advanced dialogue, cooperation, and understanding across regions and also generations. His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal is recognized as both a statesman and a peacemaker, driven by a deep humanitarian inclination. For decades, he has advocated for dialogue between faiths and promoted a vision for West Asia and North Africa based on human dignity, sustainable development, and regional cooperation. Now, to carry this vision forward, Prince Hassan established institutions dedicated to inclusive dialogue, scientific cooperation, and mutual understanding, including the Royal Scientific Society, the Arab Thought Forum, and the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies. Through his writing, including Search for Peace, he explored the challenges of reconciliation and the need to find a politics of the middle ground in the region. His work is grounded also in a very long family legacy. The Hashemite dynasty held custodianship of Mecca for extended periods and later ruled in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. His Royal Highness is a descendant of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Sharif Hussein ibn Ali, Emir of Mecca, who dreamed of establishing an Arab kingdom across the Hejaz, Iraq, Greater Syria, Jordan, and Palestine. For Prince Hassan, lasting peace begins with knowledge and understanding to counter ignorance and intolerance. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind welcome. After that well-structured conversation between President Stubb and the moderator, I think there is very little left to be said, you might say. However, once upon a time, Marty Ahtisaari was in Jordan. It was around the time of the Iraq-Kuwait war, and the world was searching for a mediator or a mentor in bringing peace in that troubled region of the world. Or was it the Iraq-Iran war? I can't remember. I've faced war once every decade in my region, which I would describe not as the Arab world, but the Levant, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. I spent a long time with Marty saying, if you are going to a war zone in the Iraq Gulf context, may I just respectfully ask you, what background do you have? Today, we heard from President Stubb the importance of empathy, which I would call cultural affinity. Marty admitted to me that he was ill-prepared for this mission. Now, whether this was peace weariness after so many missions successfully in different parts of the world, or something else, I don't know. But shortly after that, I came to Helsinki, and I've been told that when addressing an audience in a Scandinavian country, you must maintain eye contact, particularly with students, because the minute a peep of sunshine appears, you might not see them again. And I was sitting idly by a window in this lecture hall where Marty was holding forth, and suddenly I felt everybody looking at me and Marty's finger pointing at me. He saved my career, he said. My goodness, by advising me not to go to Iraq. And that I will always remember from a great man who had the modesty to admit that he did not have the empathy, as described earlier, by his pupil, President Stubb, and did not have the cultural affinity. Another example of cultural affinity came up when the Bamyan temples were destroyed in Afghanistan. Some of us, including your humble servant, as a Muslim, were asked, including representation from Turkey and from the Azhar and other, the Mufti of Sarajevo, I believe, to go to Afghanistan to speak as Muslim to Muslim, as it were, to the Taliban and tell them what you are contemplating is wrong. Because in the life of the Prophet, these venerated temples existed and continued to exist for hundreds of years. We were not allowed to go by the United Nations, who sent French diplomats, Japanese diplomats, one of whom admitted to me that we would have only gone to offer Japanese money. Now, this is a little bit hard on the ears, I must say, but the fact is that Muslims to sit with other Muslims to address inter-Muslim issues is a question of cultural affinity. And Marty spoke from experience. He had lived through conflict, he had worked to end it, he knew his limitations, and he believed firmly in the heart of CMI. Again, I would yearn, like all of you probably, for a CPI, a conflict prevention initiative, rather than a management initiative. We've heard a lot from President Stubb about the importance of giving agency to other parts of the world. I wasn't quite sure what was meant by giving agency. I think that we have a lot of patronage in the world. We have a lot of rentier economics in the world, but we do not, as yet, unfortunately, have an understanding of enablement and empowerment for people to come out and own the peace that they yearn for. To own the peace, to be a shareholder in that peace at all levels means the mobilization of peoples, not only giving agency. In marking this 25th anniversary of CMI, and in reflecting on the legacy of its founder, in that case, we are reminded, as President Ahtisaari believed, that peace is not an event, but a process. As for inalienable rights, self-determination was watered down, it became inalienable rights. I think that it's important to bear in mind that as freedom of expression is being curtailed in different parts of the world, democracy, parliamentary discussion, dialogue is in and of itself being stunted. The media is overly powerful and manages to manage not only news, but views, and views are well filtered if they are to appear at all. So when we say rebooting peace around human dignity and human capital, I am reminded of the fact that in the 80s, I chaired, along with others, an initiative called for by the Secretary General of the United Nations to develop a new international independent humanitarian order. My colleagues included Simone Veil, herself an Auschwitz survivor, Robert McNamara, who described himself to us as a born-again peacemaker. We had participation from the 5 Security Council members from Scandinavia. We had over 28 members. What did the study that we presented to the United Nations do? it contributed to United Nations organizations. They cannibalized some of our recommendations. So, for example, UNDRO, the United Nations Disaster Relief Organization, became OCHA, the Office for the Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs. I think that rebooting towards prevention means developing the R2P, right to respect, which Lloyd Axworthy from Canada, who just stepped down as the chair of the World Refugee and Migration Council, supported, and possibly revisiting LEOP, the legal empowerment of the poor. Because let me tell you, peace is an issue largely between the haves and the have-nots in the world. We may call them North, South, East or West. But when we look at the disastrous effects of climate change, the tornadoes and the hurricanes ripping through so much of the world today, and you look at those miserable people. I was in the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital a few days ago. There was a girl with her face totally burnt, and she had a plastic mask trying to keep her features together. Her family, her father, her mother, her siblings, the whole family had been burnt in that tent. And yet she was the mascot of hope. She was the mascot of hope for the people in that hospital, which is hosting Yemenis, which is hosting Sudanese, which is hosting Syrians, which is hosting Gazans, the human detritus, if you will, or what was called today by a prominent Western leader as garbage. We are not garbage. We are human beings, and we have a right to develop in terms of human dignity. The actions of certain extremists should not then be held as a reason to vilify a people. Today, Palestine has become a testing ground, ladies and gentlemen, for weaponry and surveillance systems, a place where methods of control are refined and exported, a laboratory for subjugation, in the words of Anthony Löwenstein, the Palestine laboratory, how Israel exports the technology of occupation around the world. It is my concern that this trajectory is going to lead further. We all have already witnessed ecocide, homicide, domicide, but will it lead to cogitocide, the ability to think independently, cogens, to think for ourselves? This is the question. Marty's approach shaped his service, as we know, from Namibia to the Balkans. And the term Balkanisierung, or Balkanization, basically means the fragmentation of societies, as the fragmentation of 300 million people in the Mashriq or the Levant is proceeding apace. But Marty was notably recognized as the UN Special Envoy for the future status of the process for Kosovo. He facilitated, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, he enabled, he did not impose by diktat. We came up with a series of proposals. I consulted with him on a citizens' charter for our region, along the lines of your Helsinki Citizens' Assembly, a Levant Citizens' Assembly grounded in full local participation and a water and energy community. The Europeans started with coal and steel. Why can we not start with water and energy? Well, the reason is obvious, that the wealth of the region and of the world, if you look at 31 degrees meridian east from the Baltic, which is now referred to as the NATO lake, all the way down to the Black Sea. We were talking about Yalta a minute ago. All the way to Madagascar, there are 10 conflicts raging in this world. Along the course of this 31 degrees meridian, you have Ethiopia's tensions over the Grand Renaissance Dam, the devastation of Ukraine, the tragedy of Gaza, the continuing instability of Sudan and South Sudan, land and resource clashes in Kenya and Uganda, and the exploitation of mineral wealth in eastern Congo. So is what we are seeing today, to put the text into the context, that the global text is increasingly shaped not by human beings, not by human capital, but by rare earth minerals? Is the agency required to acquire larger swathes of rare earth minerals, subterranean resources, and surface development with human capital and the dignity of hinterland countries receiving little attention? I would like to pay tribute to President Alexander Stubb in that he observed that the recognizing of facts is the beginning of wisdom. We need incontrovertible facts in which we can all believe. We need to find a value-based system which is based in realism if we are to proceed. And without a comprehensive effort at reconstruction, or possibly a modern Marshall Plan, our region in particular risks further fragmentation. Our region, once again, the Gulf, with focus on the Straits of Hormuz, the Gulf Cooperation with focus on the Red Sea region, on the geological shields of the Arabian Shield on the one side and the Nubian Somali Shield on the other. All of this is all very well. Navies, armies, and air forces of the world are concentrated there as never before. For what reason? I leave the question hanging. This is the sadness that people in our part of the world see every day of their life. People are not stupid. I believe in a united peoples, not a united nations, because peoples do not turn their backs on each other, ladies and gentlemen. Governments turn their backs on each other when and if it suits them. So I would like to suggest to you that regionalization and intra-independence may be a new word to some of you. You recognize my identity. The subject of the recognition of Palestine reminds me that we are governed by 3 letters in this political dictionary that we are unraveling. T for territory, I for identity, and M for migration. This is what moves our world today, and maybe they should be said in the plural: territorialities, identities, and migrations. I listened to General Kuyat, formerly of the German Air Force, a few months ago, talking about that line, the 31-degree east meridian, and saying that the world, we were here talking to the issue of the West, the East, if you will, Asian East, African East, Southern Eastern Mediterranean, is all governed by one word: energy. In Athens, at an international conference on archaeology, I was talking about the Phoenicians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, civilization which made Sidon a principal trading port, Gaza a principal trading port for the Nabateans. Today we are told that over and above everything else, we have no history. We don't exist. Is the time not ripe to appeal directly to people at all levels. In April, we're hosting, as Arab Thought Forum, the youth of the Arab world. It will be a discussion rather than a triumphalist speech-making conference, and it will address a multi-dimensional poverty index. Women who are cooking today with dung and coal cannot be expected to recognize and salute the great energy breakthroughs of the world and of the superpower status that we are envisaging with AI. In fact, I must ask where AI centers of excellence are being developed and who are they serving, and whether they can contribute to inclusion or to deepening global divides. I don't want to take much of your time. I thank you for the opportunity of addressing you, and I can only conclude with dear Marty Ahtisaari's words in his Nobel lecture, as was reflected on the pop-up that we saw a minute ago. Wars and conflicts are not inevitable. They are caused by human beings like you and me, and they are made by people. They can be stopped by people. That is why we're gathered here today. Thank you very much.
At a time when conflicts are multiplying, dialogue and peace mediation still change lives. CMI, Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation exists because we believe all conflicts can be resolved. Founded by President Martti Ahtisaari in 2000, we are an independent Finnish organization dedicated to preventing and resolving violent conflicts through dialogue and mediation. Every year, we implement more than 20 dialogue and mediation initiatives across the Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Eurasia, and Asia. Over the past 25 years, we have advanced more than 50 peace processes. We connect people across divides. We help build trust, find common ground, and support peaceful solutions. Guided by 5 principles: local ownership, inclusivity, complementarity, honesty, and integrity. We create the space for others to lead change. Our team includes experts from diplomacy, civil society, politics, and academia, with nearly 200 employees and consultants working across regions. We are funded by long-term strategic partners, including the European Union and the governments of Finland, Sweden, and Ireland, as well as private individuals and companies who support our work. In the rapidly changing peace and security landscape, our mission is simple: to make peace processes more effective, strengthen those who build peace, develop better tools for peacemaking, and to prove every day that dialogue works. What people have started, people can end, because peace is a question of will.
thank you once again, His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal, for your powerful, thought-provoking, sharp reflections and for grounding this evening very much in a needed way in a global moral perspective. Thank you again. Thank you. We now continue the evening with a high-level exchange featuring three distinguished leaders whose work promotes justice, peace, and equality around the world. Their contributions have shaped policy, diplomacy, and public life in profound ways, and they continue to inspire people across continents. Our first speaker has been a driving force for principled leadership for decades. Her Excellency Mary Robinson is a founding member and former chair of the Elders, the independent group of global leaders founded by Nelson Mandela to defend peace, justice, human rights, and a sustainable planet. A passionate advocate for gender equality and climate justice, as an elder, she has taken these principles to the highest platforms, from the UN Security Council to meetings with heads of states across continents. Mary Robinson was Ireland's first woman president, later served as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and has taken on critical roles as the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy in areas ranging from the Great Lakes region to climate diplomacy during the landmark Paris Agreement. Today, as an adjunct professor for climate justice at Trinity College Dublin, her leadership continues to guide new generations. We're also very honored to be joined by a speaker who has shaped regional peace building and diplomacy across Africa for more than 35 years. Her Excellency Ambassador Liberata Mulamula currently serves as the African Union Commission Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security. Ambassador Mulamula has served Tanzania in several senior roles, including as Minister of Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation, Ambassador to the United States and Mexico. She has also served as Executive Secretary of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, establishing its secretariat in Bujumbura, Burundi. Ambassador Mulamula is a strong voice for the Windhoek Plus 25 agenda. She believes that women's participation in peace and security is not only optional, but essential for a stable and prosperous continent. Our final speaker is a firm advocate for democracy and women's rights in Afghanistan. Mrs. Fawzia Koofi is an acclaimed politician, former member of parliament, and the first woman to serve as second deputy speaker of the Afghan parliament. She has been involved in peace negotiations with the Taliban, advocating for the inclusion of women and marginalized groups in peace processes. Beyond her political career, Koofi is the founder and president of Women for Afghanistan and has mobilized global advocacy platforms to amplify Afghan women's voices. Her work has earned her international recognition, and she has been named among BBC's 100 Women and Fortune 550's Greatest Leaders. Since fleeing Afghanistan in 2021, Fawzia Koofi has continued to engage with world leaders and international organizations. Her aim is to find solutions to Afghanistan's humanitarian and political crises with a focus on women's rights and, of course, inclusive peace. Tonight's high-level exchange will be hosted by Janne Talas, Chief Executive Officer at CMI. Dr. Janne Talas has served as CEO of CMI, Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, since May 2021. He has almost 25 years of experience in the Finnish Foreign Service, specializing in multilateral diplomacy and peace mediation. He worked as the Special Envoy to 2020 Afghanistan Conference, the Ambassador of Cyber Diplomacy, the Finnish Ambassador to Rome, and Deputy Permanent Representative in the Finnish mission to the United Nations in New York, and as the Director of Policy Planning. Many things. We will begin the high-level exchange with remarks from Mary Robinson, who worked closely with President Martti Ahtisaari. Distinguished guests, please help me welcome Mary Robinson to deliver her remarks.
Good evening, and It's an honor and a privilege, and I have to say a joy, to be with you here this evening for this wonderful celebration of CMI's 25th anniversary. We've already heard great wisdom and indeed great passion, and I look forward very much to the conversation that I will have with my two sisters as we are moderated just after I have given you my brief remarks. But I want to start on a personal note. Today is also a special day of memories for me, because on the 3rd of December 1990, I was inaugurated as the first woman president of Ireland. So, that little dance that I did as I was coming up to the stage is very much a tribute to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the first chair of the elders. He taught me the importance of humor and the importance at times of making yourself a bit ridiculous and making people laugh, because then maybe they'll listen to you. So there we are. The themes of today's discussion, the challenges of peacemaking, how the international landscape has evolved over the past 25 years, and how to respond to those changed realities couldn't be more timely. But the principles underpinning CMI's work are timeless. That lasting peace must be rooted in justice and human rights, and that the victims of conflict and atrocities must be at the heart of negotiations for a peaceful future. These are the principles that inspired Martti Ahtisaari throughout his life and informed his approach to peacemaking across the globe. I first got to know Martti when he was working for the United Nations on Namibia, helping that country on its way to independence and freeing it from the shackles of apartheid and occupation. I admired how he combined an unwavering commitment to freedom and dignity with a deep understanding of the nuances and subtleties of diplomatic processes and the need to pursue an inclusive approach rooted in open and good faith dialogue to yield peace. Over the years, we built a firm friendship, and I always valued our discussions when I served as President of Ireland and later as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Martti confided in me about his plan to run for the presidency of Finland in 1994, a role he fulfilled with characteristic wisdom, humility, and empathy, as he helped navigate this country through the political and economic turbulences of the early post-Cold War era. He also confided in me about his decision not to seek a second term as president, telling me he was following my example as President of Ireland. So I'm honoured to have inspired him in that small way. Martti's achievements as a peacemaker in the early years of this century, from H.R.H to Kosovo, and of course his invaluable contribution to the Northern Ireland peace process, will be familiar to everyone in this hall. The fact that all three peace accords have held to this day is testament to his skills as a negotiator in crafting durable settlements, as is, of course, the role Namibia plays today as an equal sovereign member of the global family of nations and a country that has a woman president leading it, I'm glad to say. Given his achievements and knowing him as I did, I was delighted when Martti accepted the invitation to join the elders in 2009, just 2 years after Nelson Mandela had founded the organization in 2007. Martti was a natural fit with the elders. He brought his characteristic humility to our meetings, always listening to others with great attentiveness. But when he did speak, he was the wisest person in the room. As elders, we traveled together to conflict regions and hotspots, including Sudan, South Sudan, and North Korea, to promote dialogue, de-escalation, and peace building. We also both traveled to Myanmar, though on separate occasions, as part of the elders' efforts to promote a peaceful transition there. Were he still with us today, I know Martti would be profoundly saddened that Sudan and Myanmar remain scarred by terrible conflicts, and that North Korea continues to be a nuclear-armed international pariah. But I also know that he would not allow this sorrow to lapse into fatalism, but rather insist that every conflict can be solved, as we've heard, provided there is the political will to do so. This conviction drove him to establish CMI 25 years ago and has made it such a well-respected actor in the sphere of international peace, security and conflict resolution. To conclude my remarks, I'd like to return to the words of Martti Ahtisaari himself, from an article he wrote exactly 8 years ago when he announced that he was becoming an elder emeritus, meaning retired, and stepping back from the day-to-day work of our group. He said then, "I have dedicated my life to conflict mediation and have always held a firm belief in talking to all sides in order to reach solutions that ultimately will halt the suffering of thousands, if not millions of people. But these solutions require the powerful nations of the world, particularly those with the privilege of serving as permanent members of the UN Security Council, to act with courage and responsibility in conflicts where they can wield influence. All member states of the United Nations have to commit to the global values of the UN. These values have been fundamental to sustaining peace following the devastation of the Second World War. Their significance has not changed since, yet many of today's leaders have turned their backs on these commitments. What was true in 2018 when he said those words is equally true in 2025, if not more so. And as President Stubb so eloquently argues in the article published today, which was discussed by him this evening, the article in Foreign Affairs, without a strong multilateral system, all diplomacy becomes transactional. A multilateral world makes the common good a self-interest. A multipolar world runs simply on self-interest. All of us here who share Martti Ahtisaari's commitment to peace dialogue and cooperation have a responsibility to ensure that our leaders fulfill their obligations as he did so consistently. We need fearless and determined organizations like CMI, and in our own modest way, the elders, to continue to work at both the grassroots and highest global levels in the service of peace. Martti Ahtisaari has bequeathed a powerful legacy to the world, which CMI is living proof. I offer you my heartfelt congratulations on this anniversary and my ongoing commitment to keep working with you for a better, more peaceful and equal world. And I look forward now to the conversation with my sisters. Thank you very much.
Our sincere thanks to Mary Robinson, not only for your powerful words, but absolutely fantastic dancing skills. Thank you. And it is also my pleasure now, you don't have to dance, but our next panelists to join you on the stage, Ambassador Liberata Mulamula, Fawzia Koofi, and our moderator, of course, Janne Talas. Welcome onto the stage.
It's a great honor to share a podium with these distinguished ladies. And so,
You're the gender balance.
No, I am. That's what I am acutely aware that I am the gender balance for once. And so maybe this reflects CMI, what we are. And thank you, President Robinson, for setting the scene so well. I think these were the issues that we hope to discuss. And I welcome this conversation on how we can reboot peacemaking. We have heard powerful words about the state of global affairs by the President and by His Royal Highness and President Robinson. Our purpose in this panel is kind of focused, and it's quite simple. What can we do better? What could we do? Maybe I have the first question to Ambassador Mulamula. As we have heard, the multilateral system is struggling. The paralysis in decision-making, not only in the Security Council, but also among regional organizations, hampers our collective response. We have deep structural inequalities with the system. How effective and how legitimate are global peace and security mechanisms? What is our capacity for collective action for peace, especially from African perspective? What must change? Please.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I see more ties in the room and suits than dresses and skirts. Let me start what we do best in diplomacy, to thank and thank and thank again. I feel honored to be here tonight in commemorating, because I remember, Jean, you said we should not say celebrating. Commemorating 25 or 25th anniversary of CMI. I must say I come from Tanzania, and CMI, of course, is like a household name, but also we were privileged to host President Martin Sali as the Finnish ambassador to Tanzania. But one thing, I think when we celebrate his legacy, he brought to Tanzania the culture of sauna. We never knew about sauna, but he was able to co-opt our president, now President Benjamin Mkapa, the late, to the sauna culture. I'm also happy to be here while we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of CMI, but we are also celebrating 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security. For those who followed, in the same year that President H.R.H. established CMI, the year 2000, was the year when Namibia, as a member of a non-permanent member of the Security Council, introduced a resolution. This became a historic resolution on women, peace and security, to get the UN Security Council to acknowledge the reality and the living reality that to achieve sustainable peace, you need to have the participation of women. To achieve sustainable peace, you need to protect, prevent, and involve women in terms of recovery, relief and recovery. So this became, in the history of the United Nations and the international community, as a resolution that we were celebrating. Of course, we were commemorating, because in the 25 years, when you look back, how much progress has been made, we find we are still challenged. So I'm here because of the recognition of the work that CMI has done. And when you see our panel tonight, and I feel privileged to be sitting next to our role model, the former president, the first president of Ireland. But I also feel privileged to be sitting next to a remarkable woman in Afghanistan. I'm sure she will speak for herself, but every time I speak about women, peace and security, I make reference to the women in Afghanistan. What you have been able to achieve, but also the challenges. Now, coming to your question, let me say, especially the theme of rebooting peace is very timely. We heard from President Stubb, I think he said it all. I just recently came back from Luanda, Angola, where I attended the summit of the African Union and European Union summit. The theme was on promoting peace and prosperity through multilateralism. I was telling Excellency Mel Robinson, he said, okay, what did you think of that summit? I said, there were so many good speeches. I even had a permanent member of the Security Council. There's no name calling, but you know who is the permanent member in the European Union, acknowledging that the UN Security Council, it's high time, needed to be reformed and opened up for the participation of Africa. He said, you cannot be talking of multilateralism when you leave 1.4 billion voices out of this system. So we are here today to underline the importance, of course, of multilateralism. Maybe we would not even be here all if it was not this CMI respecting the multilateralism. But we have heard also how fractured it is, how fragmented it is, how complex. This afternoon, His Royal Highness was saying it's not about complex. It is more than that. So what do we do? Speaking from the African perspective, I wanted to repeat what the president has said, and he repeated the word agency. So the African perspective is anchored on the agency, that we can't wait for the world to fix the system. We need to move. You outlined the 5 principles that guide the work of the CMI. And what I picked most, and this was also the legacy of President Mahathir, inclusivity. That you cannot have lasting peace, or he said lasting peace is possible if it is inclusive dialogue. Inclusivity. And I've just been appointed in this position. I've been making a lot of noise on this. I was saying inclusivity is not a choice, but it is a necessity. And the African Union, through its peace and security architecture, they have come up with the doctrine as a principle that inclusivity is non-negotiable. And this includes, of course, inclusivity of the women, of the youth, and everyone. Here we heard about everyone being a shareholder of peace. That peace is for all of us. When President Stubb was in Tanzania, he challenged everybody. He said, it is high time that we come up with a common understanding of what peace is all about. Because now it's even difficult to learn what is peace. So based on the principles we have said, I just pick 2. And this is what also the African Union and my office of the Special Envoy we are focusing in. Local ownership. Let us localize these peace processes. Because it gives the legitimacy, It gives ownership, and it's people-centered. But also as we move, you also mentioned, I think the President or His Royal Highness, regionalization. I was privileged to start up the framework, the intergovernmental organization called the International Conference on the Great Lakes region. This was after the turbulent years in that region, that we need to own the problem as a region and seek for regional solutions. So what the African Union is doing at the moment is to operationalize the role of the regional communities, mechanisms as the first responders, and they have been the first responders and the conveners of this. So I can't go on and say, because I know we have only 5 minutes, but what the African Union has realized, that we have all these normative frameworks, we have the legal instruments, but why are we in this situation where we are? So lastly, I want to bring to you that we are now focusing also on promoting intergenerational dialogue, have the youth at the table, have the youth being part and parcel, and we have seen what the Gen Z can do. I thank you.
Thank you. I am happy to tell you that of all CMI dialogues, more than half of participants are consistently women.
Oh,
so that has been our policy and our practice for many years. Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker Koofi, we met in Doha 2020 when you were key person in the Republican negotiating team in negotiating with Taliban. From your perspective, what does Afghanistan's experience reveal about our systemic limitations? How could multilateral structures or peacemaking practices be renewed to better address the realities of today? Please.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be in this beautiful country, although I'm told this is probably not the best time to be in Finland. Yeah. For many years, I have been hearing that Finnish people are the happiest people on earth, and I always wanted to come to Finland to look for the reasons why Finnish people are the happiest people. I'm still trying to find out what makes you the happiest people on earth. To exemplify that to our parts of the world, but definitely there are many things that you could be proud. And I think one of the things that I could see firsthand in Afghanistan during the past 20 years of the foreign troops' presence and international community support to Afghanistan was the fact that Finland is a small country in population, of course huge and very strategic on the geographical landscape, had a huge impact on presence on the situation in Afghanistan. And I think this is definitely something that you must be very happy and proud about. Maybe this is a small reason to contributing to your happy nation. In terms of, we heard amazing speeches, and I was amazed by the conversation of the president and ideas he had. Obviously, I also followed his meeting with President Trump, and I congratulated him. I said it's not easy these days to get those kind of meetings with President Trump, so you really have to offer strong agenda to get those meetings. But as said, we're living in a time, Ambassador, that multilateralism is being really challenged, and there is a decline in multilateralism, but on reverse, there is a growth of new realities, new players. There is a growth of new players. For instance, looking at the situation in the Asia and Middle East, we know that there are the traditional players, like let's say the UN, Security Council, other traditional players are not playing their role to the extent that they should, but there are, regional countries, individuals, etc. Now, is this the reborn or the born of a new world order, or we are lacking a world order, is something that time will define, as President said. But at least in the case of Afghanistan, I know that diplomacy and multilateralism failed. And we are, as women and as people, paying the highest price for that failure. Today we are celebrating 25th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and commemorating 25th anniversary of CMI as the respectable organization on pursuing so many important peace processes. But this is a time for us to redefine peace. In the context of a country like Afghanistan, who has been in war for 5 decades, does really peace mean absence of war? For many of us in Afghanistan, peace no longer means you silence the guns. For us, peace means beyond that. Peace means justice. Peace means inclusivity. Peace means sleeping in your bedroom without the fear of tomorrow being whipped by the dictators and powers just because they bring peace and silence the guns. I think it's a time for us to redefine peace in the context of equity, not only gender equity, equity of access to resources, equity of access to opportunities. And I again gave the example of Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, a girl cannot have access to a pen and the paper. She's banned from her basic fundamental rights to education. And the whole world is silent, but in the global north, if you go along with those terms, in the global north, people talk about customized AI for their students. For so long, we continue to live in that world with huge disparities. We're actually handing over the nations to radicalization, to military radicalization. And we are making this world so unequal. So that's why it's time for us to redefine a few things. First, peace. Second, diplomacy. We do diplomacy because power imbalance leads to conflict. And conflict leads to dictators. That's why diplomacy is important. Diplomacy is important to bring some power, not only in the government structure, but also in protecting our minority. Every society has some minorities. We need to protect them. But in the case of Afghanistan, all of this failed. Because can you imagine 18 million people plus women in Afghanistan today are under house arrest just because we wanted to sign a deal with the Taliban to bring peace. If instead of 18 million women in Afghanistan today, they were a religious group or an ethnic group, would the world be silent? It's a wake-up call for the minorities around the world. Minority in content, not in number, because in this case, we are not minority in number. We are just minority in power. We do not have access to gun. I think at some point throughout this road, we need to have an army of women to bring some power balance. Otherwise, for as long as peace is only about political agreements and political signing, signatories, and ceremonies, the ordinary people, the ones who are affected, will continue to be the victim. That's why we started, after 4 years of being in exile, after 4 years of seeing my country sinking into so many overarching problems, from human rights crisis to humanitarian crisis to political crisis, and us, people who invested our blood and treasure for our country. I was shot twice, actually, for what I was doing for my country by the Taliban. We came to this understanding that we need to take our destiny in our control and rewrite the narratives. So we started this political process, dialogue, because we need to write our own narrative, ownership is very important. And we are hoping that by crafting our narrative, bringing all exiled forces, people from inside Afghanistan together, we come to a point where the laws are no longer translated for us from English or French or Arabic or any other language, but we write our laws, we write our narrative. Yes, we live in a world that is interconnected to each other. We cannot live without international support, but I think people in the so-called third world country, if there is any first world country, need to wake up and write their own narrative. And people who are standing at the right side of the history, like European Union, like Finland, like European Union. I think European continent, with all, the fact that you are worried about your security, you are the only continent that people have a hope to, that people still see as a continent that protect values. Then we can ask you for your support. But for now, give us the space. I was inspired by the video. CMI gives the space. Give us the space from the third world country so we craft our narrative. And this is what we are doing. It might look a little impossible for you sitting in this beautiful building, that how can women in Afghanistan write their narrative? I must say, with all the challenges we undergo, that we are not allowed to work, study, get out of our homes. Maybe tomorrow they will say you're not allowed to even breathe as a human beings. But we still resist, and we write our own narrative. We started a political process, bringing men together. We have a beautiful tradition in Afghanistan. Ambassador, I'm sure you remember, because you have been special envoy in Afghanistan. When the two families fought together, women will put their scarf as a means of bringing the families to forgive one another and to mediate. So women want to get that traditional role to mediate. And we start from the region, because we believe if multilateralism is declining, regionalization should actually be empowered. So we started from the region. We hope that this will move to a political process. But in the meantime, we know with the many priorities around the world, Afghanistan is no longer making headlines until there is another, I'm not saying, 9/11 happened and the world will wake up and say, oh, there is a silent tsunami, we have to do something about it. So Afghanistan is a country that you always need to keep as your strategic priority before another 9/11 happened, because migration, it is a real challenge from Afghanistan. Growth of military violent groups, it's a real challenge. Afghanistan is now the hub for all of that. There were many mistakes that done in the last 20 years. We have learned it, we want to correct it. We need your support and solidarity to work together on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. President Robinson, in your rousing speech, you mentioned Good Friday Agreement, and I have read you have described the agreement as one giving centrality to human rights and equality. That's how you have described it. So the world that has changed profoundly since signing of Good Friday Agreement. What core commitments exemplified in the Good Friday Agreement must be upheld, and how that could be done in today's world?
Well, we are very proud of the Good Friday Agreement for the reasons that you said. And actually, women played an extraordinary role well before the Good Friday Agreement to encourage my sisters. Women came out from the housing estates because the youth were being kneecapped, they were being killed, there was this terrible fighting going on, the conflict was been going on for so long in their lives. And they said, we can't stand this anymore. And they came out and met each other. And then, I was president before the Good Friday Agreement. And I managed to invite groups. I met them in Northern Ireland, but I also invited them down to my residence in Dublin to encourage and say, you are right. You are making peace. You are initiating. And I'm very glad you reminded us again, this is also the 25th anniversary of 1325, and you have a wonderful mandate.
Thank you.
The peace agreement was very much grounded on human rights, yes, but also intense balance. The balance between the parties in Northern Ireland, the balance of the two governments, the British and Irish governments, the identities, and the opening up of identities, which I think in the Middle East is something we really need to think about. For the first time, people could be British and Irish and European. Well, now, because of Brexit, the European part for Northern Ireland is more complicated. But I think it had so many ingredients. I've often talked to our current chair of the elders, President Santos, because he also admired the Good Friday Agreement, and he brought a lot of it into his peace with the FARC. There's a whole gender chapter. There's a whole, his peace with the indigenous, his peace with nature. I think we need to think very deeply about how we reboot peace and how we, and I so agree with the points emphasized by both of you, inclusiveness, localization, regional, try to get some regional structures that help countries. Because what we're seeing, sadly, is too much abandonment of rule of law at the international level. I mean, these atrocity crimes that are going at the moment with impunity, and then when courts like the International Court of the ICC and the International Court of Justice take steps, the judges are sanctioned. This is appalling. This is really, really serious, and we must give more pushback on this, more voice pushback on it than we hear from governments that subscribe to rule of law. Speak out more about the fact that this is not acceptable, that the very courts that we have established to guard and enable the full rule of law are themselves being weakened, undermined, and prosecutors and judges are being sanctioned.
Thank you. I am tempted to go to the deep end, inspired by this discussion. I thought I would ask all of you the same question. It is kind of reflecting all the discussions what we have had. What do you think? One concrete. Please give me one concrete change. What should we change that is needed in today's peacemaking? And one concrete change that need to be preserved. So what do you think are the absolute crucial things to change and to preserve? And this is kind of, I'm reflecting how the CMI approach. So why don't we start with the Mulamula and then Koofi and then President Robinson. Mulamula, what do you think is that really need to change? I guess what it is, but and then what needs to be preserved? What is the core of something? Please.
I think this was also put very well by the president. Yeah. I think what we need to change actually is our mindset.
Okay.
Mindset. I remember our late president, Benjamin Mkapa. He was saying his biggest challenge leading the country is to change the mindset of the Tanzanian people. So he said, to change the mindset, what do you need? You hit them on the head, you hit them on the back, but that is fundamental. Because we have all what we need. I remember when I was a young officer, at the United Nations, I found there was this call of the new world order, international order. We are now calling again on the international world order. So what we need is here, and His Royal Highness to talk about the facts and all. I think that's what we need. Nothing else, because we have all it takes. We know the what, we know the why it has happened, we know the when. Now the question is how do we change our mindset and perspectives? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador, I think the one thing that we need to really change is including those who are affected by conflict in the negotiation, bringing them to the table. This was the case in Afghanistan. When the United States negotiated with the Taliban, they actually excluded the government, I'm not talking about how corrupt the government was, there was problems. There are problems in any government. But the American soldiers, European soldiers, invested their blood and their treasure, the money, to make that government. But they bypassed that government and they want to directly talk with the Taliban as if we were not party to the war, resulted into what we see in Afghanistan today. So inclusion of women, especially women, because women do not only lose lives, they lose opportunities. So 4 years after the takeover of Taliban, 4 years of education ban on women, 4 years of generations that lost every opportunity. So we need to include these people who are affected directly. And what should we preserve? I think we should preserve the principle of accountability. Any peace process that trades away accountability for short-term political deals actually deepen the conflict. Because, as I said before, peace is not just about signing deals. It's about coexistence. It's about acceptance. It's about people pardoning, people apologizing. It's about basically healing the wounds. Because if you are shot and you get injury, that wound can be healed. But if you're deprived and there is injustice against you, it's so hard to heal that wound. So people need to feel that there is a process that listens to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Koofi. President Robinson, please.
I do agree very much with a point emphasized by President Stubb in his discussion earlier and in his very good essay in Foreign Affairs, which I read this morning. We do need to restructure our world to enable a balanced world of 2026, not of 1945. And we need it both politically in the UN, we need it in the economic institutions, we need it in the World Trade Organization, and we need a more balanced world. That will help us to navigate forward. But we absolutely need the values that we have built up. And obviously the Charter of the United Nations, but as a former High Commissioner, may I say particularly the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if you'll allow me to critique my world, the human rights world, on one particular aspect, we have allowed the way in which we have defended and elaborated the protections of human rights to become too individual. Now, individual human rights are extremely important, and they're summarized very well in Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. I love that dignity comes before rights, and that's important. But there's also another article that for some reason, and I really regret this, I talked about it as High Commissioner, but the human rights community has not pushed this, and it's very deeply relevant now. Article 29, there are 30 articles, so the second last one begins, everyone has duties to the community, in which alone they reach the free and full expression of their personality. And when I mention that to audiences, they haven't heard it before. It's new. What is this? And yet, it's profound. We all know this when you do things for community. Well, you know, I've just come from Belém, from the COP in Belém, where we were talking about the Climate and Nature Conference. And in their wisdom, the COP presidency, the Brazilian presidency, was talking about their word for working collectively together, mutirao. It speaks to the Irish word mehel. It speaks to Ubuntu in Southern Africa. You know, as human beings, we are that collective sense of duty. And then, you know, you have duties locally, in your family, in your neighborhood, in whatever organization you're involved in, but you also have duties more globally. And I think we need to, you know, reinforce that collective sense of working together collectively in the common interest. You know, I think that is really important.
Thank you. That's inspiring thought, and I feel there's a little bit as a heart of CMI about that. It's a duty and it's an honor that you...
And you get more back.
Yes.
From working in community.
Yeah, that you're absolutely right. I really would like to thank you for this really insightful thoughts from very, very experienced ladies who have really made significant contributions. I've taken some points, and I hope my colleagues have taken more points. We will study it in the CMI, but clearly there is kind of the key aspect of inclusion, the role of legitimacy, role of human rights, role of values, role of long-term peacemaking. These are very, very valuable insights, and I very much thank you for our distinguished speakers and for being part of this conversation. And I promise that the CMI will take this discussion forward, and I very much thank you for your contributions to it. Thank you.
Once again, thank you to our distinguished speakers and, of course, our moderator, Janne Talas. Once again, let's thank them. Thank you. Now, before we continue, a brief acknowledgement. CMI's work in dialogue and conflict prevention is strengthened and in many ways possible by the commitment of its supporters. Your contributions create real impact. To share more about this essential work, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Kaisa Raitio, Head of Communications and Private Fundraising at CMI. Welcome to the stage.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends of CMI. President Martti Ahtisaari said something very simple and very true. You can't do a damn thing alone. A recent UN report shows that global military spending is now its highest it has been since the Cold War, and it continues to rise. Military security is needed, but it is dialogue that helps make peace sustainable. This is the space where CMI works every day, and we cannot do this alone. Our work depends on our partners, donors, supporters, on you. You help us keep dialogue alive, even when it's difficult. Tonight, we also want to say thank to our supporters. We want to thank our strategic partners. Your steady support makes this work possible. We also thank everyone who has supported CMI during the past year and those who will support us in the coming year. Not every name can be shown tonight, but every act of support truly matters. And finally, a warm thank you for the private support that has made this gathering possible. Your commitment allows us to be here together and to look ahead with hope. As we come to the end, we want to share one more thing. This short film brings our work into focus. It does so by placing one familiar moment in a different light, and reminds us how much peace really matters. It shows why this work must continue and invites more people to stand with us, including through support to our Peace Fund. With that, it's a real privilege to share the premiere of this film with this audience. Thank you.
That without progress in negotiations and de-escalation...
Moment.
Kiitos. No? Se on aika selkeä. Mä toon niinku aikavyöhykin kerran. Mihin mä laitan? On ne hankalat paikat Ja.
Dear friends, we are now approaching the end of the official program here in the main hall, but you're more than warmly welcome to join us in the cocktail reception in the piazza of Finlandia Hall with live music, I hope some dancing also, and of course marking these 25 years with a toast. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for your engagement, presence, attention, and warmth. To close this evening formally, please help me welcome Mr. Marko Ahtisaari, Chair of the Board of CMI.
Martti sometimes said it sounded odd to greet people with Your Excellencies, dear friends, as if excellencies could not also be friends. So now in closing, I say to you, dear excellencies, friends, because we are all together here tonight. We've just seen a film that stays with you. A simple scene, a familiar figure, and suddenly the quiet magic of a winter night feels fragile. It reminds us why we are here, because even the most cherished traditions are not untouched by the conflicts of our world. Across this evening, we have heard voices from different regions, different generations, and different experiences of peacemaking. And yet the message has been remarkably consistent. The world is changing fast, but the essential work of peace remains grounded in human relationships, in trust, courage, and dialogue. My father put it very clearly. Peace cannot be dictated from the outside. That principle still holds. External actors can support negotiations, even push parties to the table. But the making of peace and its implementation ultimately rests with the parties to the conflict themselves. Lasting peace requires their own commitment and political will. That conviction that all conflicts can be resolved and that peace must be owned by those who live it, is at the heart of this foundation. And it is what continues to guide CMI today as we adapt to a world more divided, more digital, and in many ways more dangerous than the one in which CMI was founded. But tonight has shown something else as well. It has shown that CMI does not stand alone. We walk alongside partners, governments, mediators, experts, and communities, and alongside all of you. You have supported this work not because it is easy, but because it's necessary, and we are profoundly grateful. As we mark 25 years, we do not close a chapter, we open one. A chapter in which mediation must evolve, Diplomatic space must be defended, and the courage to talk must once again become more powerful than the temptation to turn away. The short film ended with a simple message: help us keep the night silent. But a silent night is not created by wishing for it. It is created by people who choose dialogue, who build trust, who insist that peace is possible, even when the world insists otherwise. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for believing still in the promise of peace. And thank you for helping us imagine and build the next 25 years of CMI. Good night, friends. Let us continue this work together.